Good morning. We will discuss about peptic ulcer drugs in continuation with the previous lecture that I had taken yesterday. Yesterday we basically discussed about what actually peptic ulcer is, the pathophysiological aspects of peptic ulcer, and normal physiology of gastric acid secretions, and then in the end or before uh, ending the lecture, we had discussed about various drug targets or various strategies that we can adopt to treat peptic ulcer. So in that we had seen that one of the strategy that we can adopt is by using the drugs that reduces the gastric acid secretion. In that particular class we had seen that there were three different drug class was there. One was proton pump inhibitors, other was H2 receptor antagonist, and the third one was anticholinergic. Then we discussed about the the other drug class that neutralizes the gastric acid, that is antacids. Then we have seen about the role of ulcer protectives such as prostaglandin analogs, and also we have seen the important role of anti-H. pylori drugs, or we have seen or we have discussed what role H. pylori plays in the causation of peptic ulcer. So treatment of H. pylori, particularly in the context of duodenal ulcer and also in many cases of gastric ulcer, if you can rule out other causations such as the drug use, such as the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, you can be very much sure, particularly in the context of duodenal ulcer, that this case might be due to H. pylori. So anti-H. pylori treatment is also a very important component. So we will discuss about the drugs that reduces the gastric acid secretion first, and in that we will first start with the proton pump inhibitors. So let us first discuss about proton pump inhibitors. Now, if you see the names of proton pump inhibitors, you can notice one particular thing. All the drugs among these proton pump inhibitors, they are ending with prazole. The suffix is prazole. Omeprazole, esomeprazole, pantoprazole, lansoprazole, rabiprazole. We will discuss about omeprazole as a prototype. Now, if you talk about proton pump inhibitors, nowadays it is very commonly used drug. And why it is very commonly used? Because it has been found to be very efficacious and very safe drug. And they are one of the most potent inhibitor of acid secretion that is available nowadays. Proton pump inhibitors such as omeprazole, these are available as enteric coated tablets or enteric coated granules in capsule. Now, why it is available as enteric coated tablets, we will come to know just after few minutes. And among these, pantoprazole, esomeprazole, and lansoprazole, these are also available as the parenteral form. In the parenteral form, they can be given intravenously. Now, yesterday we were discussing about the physiology of gastric acid secretion, wherein we had seen that the final step of gastric acid secretion happens through the proton pump. Proton pump is also known as H plus K plus ATPase. And this proton pump is a membrane bound enzyme, and it plays a very important role in the final step of gastric acid secretion, whether it is the basal secretion or it is a stimulated secretion. Now, what these proton pump inhibitor does, they bind covalently with this proton pump, and they inhibit the proton pump irreversibly. Now, there are certain consequences of this irreversible inhibition of proton pump, and this irreversible inhibition of proton pump is one of the reasons that makes it very potent gastric acid inhibitor. And it is ultimately acting on the final step of gastric acid secretion, whether it is due to some stimulus or the basal secretion. So, because it is inhibiting the proton pump irreversibly, this binding of the proton pump inhibitors with the proton pump, it prevents the movement of hydrogen ion out from the parietal cell into the stomach. So naturally, the gastric acid secretion will be stopped or suppressed, and once this proton pump inhibitor achieves the steady state concentration, it has been seen that it can suppress up to 98% of the 24-hour acid output. This percentage can vary, but the upper limit that has been seen is close to 98%, or we can say almost we are nearing up to 100%. And this acid suppression is regardless of the stimulating factor, whether it is due to some stimulation or the normal basal secretion. And apart from that, it also reduces the pepsin activity, and it also promotes the mucosal healing and decreases the pain. Now, if you compare proton pump inhibitors with the other drugs which suppresses the gastric acid secretion, such as H2 receptor blockers or the antimuscarinics, because proton pump inhibitor inhibit the final step of gastric acid secretion, and its inhibition is irreversible. It is covalently binding with the proton pump, and it is irreversibly inhibiting the proton pump irrespective of, and the gastric acid secretion is inhibited irrespective of any stimulus. The suppression of gastric acid production is more complete with proton pump inhibitor compared to any other drugs in this particular drug class. And also, if we talk about healing of gastric ulcer, it has been seen that proton pump inhibitor heal the gastric ulcer more rapidly compared to any other peptic ulcer drugs, and they don't have any effect on the acetylcholine receptors or the histamine receptors. one interesting thing that you must know. We call proton pump inhibitors such as omeprazole as a hit and run drug. Now, if I am calling this drug as a hit and run drug, what do I mean by this? If you see the half-lives of proton pump inhibitor, it is very short. It is in the range of 1 to 2 hours. But their action persists for up to 24 to up to even up to 48 hours. So why it is so? Half-life is very short, but their action is persisting for up to 24 to 48 hours. Why it is so? Because it is binding covalently with the proton pump and it is irreversibly inhibiting the proton pump. And if the normal acid secretion has to resume again, the parietal cell must synthesize the new proton pump. And this synthesization of new proton pump will take some time. So, in spite of being very short half-life, because it is irreversibly inhibiting the proton pump, their action will persist for relatively longer duration till the time synthesis of new proton pump happens. So normally it has been seen that it suppresses 24 to 48 hour acid secretion despite having very short plasma half-life, and that's why we call it as hit and run drug. It has bound to its target or it has hit its target, but its effect is sustaining for a very longer period. That's why we call it as hit and run drug. Now let us understand the mechanism of action in little bit detail. What we have seen that broadly proton pump inhibitors, they bind covalently with the proton pump. But how it binds, where it binds, let us understand it in little detail. All the proton pump inhibitors are prodrug. Now when I call it as prodrug, what do I mean? They need activation. So prodrug, proton pump inhibitor is a prodrug. Now this proton pump inhibitor, they need to be activated in the acidic environment. They require activation in the acidic environment. Now let us understand it in little much detail, and also while we will discuss about the pharmacokinetic aspects, we will discuss it little more further in more detail. For now, just understand that in the acidic pH of the parietal cell, once it reaches the parietal cell, at the acidic pH, it rearranges to two charged cationic form. One is sulfenamide and another is sulfenic acid. Now this sulfenamide is actually the activated form. This sulfenamide interacts covalently with the sulfhydryl group of the proton pump, and they make complex and they inhibit the enzyme irreversibly. So in nutshell, what we are seeing that in the acidic pH there is a generation of the activated form, that is sulfenamide, and this sulfenamide is binding covalently with the sulfhydryl group of the proton pump, and it is inactivating the proton pump irreversibly. Okay, so this is in nutshell that you should know. Now let us understand it in little more detail. This flowchart basically explains the things a little more. Proton pump inhibitor, once it reaches the parietal cell, it is converted into its activated form, that is sulfenamide, and this sulfenamide is binding irreversibly with the SH group of the proton pump, and it is inhibiting the proton pump irreversibly. And this irreversible inhibition of proton pump will lead to prolonged suppression of acid secretion, which will last for up to 24 to 48 hours. So this is in nutshell what actually the mechanism of action of proton pump inhibitor is. So the basic thing is that proton pump needs to reach the acidic pH of the parietal cell to get activated, to generate its activated form. But the problem is proton pump inhibitor, if they are given as such, they will get degraded in the acidic pH of the stomach. That's why I was telling you that proton pump inhibitor as a given in the form of enteric coated tablets. Now the purpose of giving proton pump inhibitor as a enteric coated tablets or enteric coated formulation is to prevent it from getting degraded in the acidic pH of the stomach, because it needs to reach the acidic environment of the parietal cell. Now if the patient is taking the drug and if it is getting degraded by the acidic media of the stomach itself, how it will reach the parietal cell and will get converted into its activated form, and then ultimately how it will inhibit the proton pump. So the idea is to give proton pump inhibitor as an enteric coated tablet. Now this enteric coated tablet, what it does, they release the drug once it reaches the intestine, where the pH is somewhat alkaline. Now, so what happens once this enteric coated tablet reaches the alkaline intestine lumen, the enteric coating get dissolved and the prodrug is absorbed from the intestine. Okay. Proton pump inhibitors such as omeprazole, these are weak bases. They are lipophilic weak bases, and because they are weak bases, they are lipid soluble in the alkaline medium of the intestine. Okay. So enteric coating has safely achieved or safely reached the alkaline medium of the intestine, and in the alkaline medium of the intestine the drug is getting released, and we know that the proton pump inhibitors are the lipophilic weak bases. So in the alkaline medium of the intestine, the lipid soluble weak bases drug will get absorbed by the passive diffusion through the lipid membrane. Okay, understood? Now once it is absorbed through the blood, it will get distributed into the parietal cell canaliculi. Okay, are you getting my point? Normally, if we give proton pump inhibitor as such, it will get destroyed in the acidic medium of the stomach. It will not reach its desired site of action. To reach its desired site of action, we need to give proton pump inhibitor as an enteric coated tablet. Okay, and this enteric coated tablet will release the drug in the alkaline medium of the intestine. And in the alkaline medium of the intestine, when the drug is released, it is getting absorbed and it is reaching the parietal cell canaliculi. And once they reach the parietal cell canaliculi, they will get exposed to the acidic environment. And once they reach the acidic environment, the weak bases that the proton pump inhibitor are, they are reaching the acidic environment, they will rapidly get ionized. And there is one phenomenon that will happen, that is known as ion trapping. We have discussed this in pharmacokinetics. So once they get ionized, they will get trapped. So ion trapping mechanism is happening here, and they cannot diffuse back. Okay, so what we have seen, proton pump inhibitor given as an enteric coated tablet, they are absorbed in the alkaline medium of the intestine, and once they are absorbed, they are reaching the blood, and through blood they are reaching the parietal cell canaliculi, where there is the acidic environment, and in the acidic environment they are getting converted into its activated form, that is sulfenamide, and this sulfenamide is binding to the SH group of the proton pump, thereby inhibiting it irreversibly. Understood? Now there is one more interesting thing that you need to understand. The thing is, the presence of food decreases the bioavailability of proton pump inhibitor significantly. So because food decreases its bioavailability significantly, we need to give this drug in the empty stomach. But the problem is, in the fasting state, only few percent of the proton pump will be in active state. To be precise, only 10% of the proton pump will be in active state in the fasting state. Rest 90% will be in the inactive form. And for optimal binding of proton pump inhibitors to the proton pump, it has been seen that pump should be in a active state. Then only binding of proton pump inhibitors with the proton pump happens effectively. So we are in dilemma. Proton pump inhibitors are not getting absorbed because of the food. Because of the food, it is not getting absorbed effectively, or its bioavailability is reduced. But the other thing is that if we give the drug in the fasting state, we are not getting desired benefit, because in the fasting state only 10% of the proton pump are in the active state. And what we are seeing, that for optimal binding of the proton pump inhibitors to the proton pump, the proton pump should be in an active state. They should actively secrete the acid. So one middle path has been formulated or has been devised, that okay, we will take proton pump inhibitor in the empty stomach, okay, but we will follow it up with a meal, or we will take the food after 1 hour. By the time it reaches the parietal cell canaliculi, or by the time it achieves its peak state, we will be taking the meal, and once we take the meal, the proton pump will be getting activated and they will start secreting actively. So by that time, the binding of proton pump inhibitors with the proton pump will happen effectively. So that's why you must have seen that proton pump inhibitor is given in a empty stomach 1 hour before the food, and we tell the patient that you take the meal after 1 hour. Okay, so these are the interesting things about proton pump inhibitor that you should remember, and it will help you clinically also. Now, what are the adverse effects of proton pump inhibitors? In the beginning, I have told you overall proton pump inhibitor are a very safe drug, and because it is a very safe drug and it is very efficacious drug and it is most potent in inhibiting the gastric acid secretion, it is very commonly used drug. Sometimes adverse effects can happen, such as the gastrointestinal adverse effects such as nausea, abdominal pain, diarrhea, or sometimes you can see joint pain, rashes, leukopenia, hepatic dysfunctions. But overall, in spite of all these adverse effects, overall proton pump inhibitors are a very safe drug, extremely safe drug. On prolonged usage of higher doses or on prolonged uses, some adverse effects can happen, such as reduced absorption of vitamin B12 can lead to vitamin B12 deficiency, because vitamin B12 absorption can be hampered in the absence of gastric acid. Same thing can happen with the absorption of calcium. The absence of gastric acid can reduce the absorption of calcium. So on the long term uses of proton pump inhibitor, there might be subnormal vitamin B12 level, or there might be risk of hip fracture or osteoporosis, particularly among the elderly patients. The other thing that can happen because of the absence of gastric acid is colonization of the bacteria in the stomach and small intestine, because gastric acid is a very important or very crucial barrier to the bacterial colonization in the stomach or in the small intestine. So if there is an absence of gastric acid, theoretically there might be a chance of bacterial colonization and infection of the stomach and intestine from the ingested bacteria. So theoretically there are chances that on prolonged usage it might increase the risk of enteric infection. The other theoretical possibility which had sometime been absorbed during animal studies is a case of hypergastrinemia. What happens if there is a suppression of gastric acid secretion? The feedback inhibitory role of the somatostatin over the gastrin release will be hampered, and because of that the gastrin level will increase up to 2 to 4 times. Now what can happen if gastrin level is increased? Now gastrin is a tropic hormone and it can cause hyperplasia of the ECL cells, and this hyperplasia of ECL cell can get transformed into carcinoid tumors. So the chances of the growth of gastrointestinal tumors such as carcinoid tumor are there theoretically, and also because of this hypergastrinemia, if you discontinue the proton pump inhibitor suddenly after prolonged use, there might be a case of rebound hypersecretion of gastric acid. So these are the theoretical possibility of the adverse effect being happening with the prolonged usage of proton pump inhibitors. Now, as far as drug interactions are concerned, proton pump inhibitors basically inhibit CYP450, so it might inhibit the metabolism of other drugs such as warfarin or phenytoin. One drug interaction that has been observed recently is that omeprazole interferes with the activation of clopidogrel. Clopidogrel is an antiplatelet drug and it gets activated through CYP2C19 enzyme. Now, what this omeprazole does, omeprazole basically inhibits CYP2C19. So it might inhibit the activation of clopidogrel. But the chances of drug interactions are relatively more with drugs such as omeprazole, and the chances of drug interaction with pantoprazole or rabiprazole is relatively less. So where we use proton pump inhibitors, we can use it in peptic ulcer, both gastric and duodenal ulcer, in bleeding peptic ulcer, in Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, in prevention of recurrence of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs associated gastric ulcers, in bleeding peptic ulcers. So these are the uses of proton pump inhibitors. Now let us discuss about H2 receptor antagonist. Now again we have seen yesterday what is the role of histamine in the secretion of gastric acid secretion. So histamine, by binding to the H2 receptor, it is increasing the cyclic AMP level, and this increased cyclic AMP is activating the protein kinase, and this activated protein kinase is ultimately activating the or stimulating the proton pump, leading to gastric acid secretion. So if you inhibit the H2 receptor, the binding of histamine to the H2 receptor, you can ultimately inhibit the gastric acid secretion. So these histamine H2 receptor blockers, they are reversible competitive inhibitors of H2 receptors on the parietal cell, and they are highly selective for the H2 receptor. They don't have got any action on H1 or H3 receptors. And as far as the acid secretion is concerned, H2 receptor antagonists, they are very effective in inhibiting the nocturnal acid secretion. Because this nocturnal acid secretion, it has been seen that it mainly depends on the histamine. So that's why you might have seen like H2 receptor antagonists such as ranitidine, famotidine. It is advised to be taken before sleep, because the reason is because it inhibits the nocturnal acid secretion, and it has got modest impact on the meal stimulated acid secretion, because the meal stimulated acid secretion, it depends on the other factors also. So the major effect of the histamine H2 receptor antagonist is in blocking the nocturnal acid secretion. It has got relatively less impact on the meal stimulated acid secretion compared to the nocturnal acid secretion inhibition, and therapeutic doses maintain up to 50% inhibition for up to 10 hours, and because of that we need to give H2 receptor antagonist twice daily. Cimetidine is the prototype among H2 receptor antagonists. The other drugs are ranitidine, famotidine, nizatidine, roxetidine, loxetidine. Cimetidine is clinically not used nowadays because of various reasons that we will understand. For theoretical purpose, you should know about cimetidine. The more preferred drugs are ranitidine or famotidine. Now, why we don't use cimetidine? What might be the reason? The first and foremost, the reason is that it is a very potent inhibitor of CYP enzymes. And because it is a potent inhibitor of CYP enzyme, it can increase the plasma concentration of drugs such as warfarin, theophylline or other drugs. So the chances of drug interaction will be very high if you are giving cimetidine. The other thing is that it is least potent. If you compare with ranitidine, ranitidine is more potent compared to cimetidine. And above all, the chances of adverse effects such as gynecomastia, impotence are very high with cimetidine, because what happens, cimetidine inhibits the binding of dihydrotestosterone to the androgen receptors, and it can manifest as impotence in male, and also it inhibits the metabolism of estradiol and increases the serum prolactin level on long-term use. So that can lead to gynecomastia and galactorrhea. The other thing is that it can cross the blood-brain barrier and can lead to CNS side effects such as mental status changes can happen. So because of these problems, the use of cimetidine has been abandoned in favor of other drugs such as ranitidine. Now all the problem that you have just noticed with cimetidine, you will not encounter with ranitidine. Ranitidine is 5 times more potent compared to cimetidine. In cimetidine, we have seen that it is a least potent drug, whereas ranitidine is a 5 times more potent drug compared to cimetidine. You do not observe any anti-androgenic effect or any effect on the male sexual function, or you do not notice gynecomastia with the use of ranitidine. It do not cross the blood-brain barrier, and it do not inhibit the metabolism of other drugs. So the chances of drug interactions are very less, and overall safety profile of ranitidine is very good. So because of all these reasons, ranitidine is more preferred compared to cimetidine. Theoretically, you are asked in the examination why cimetidine is not preferred, why ranitidine is preferred. So the uses are more or less similar to that of proton pump inhibitor, but in non-steroidal anti-inflammatory induced ulcer, proton pump inhibitors are preferred. In Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, though the surgical resection is the ultimate therapy, but in those cases also proton pump inhibitors are preferred. And also, if you compare the efficacy of proton pump inhibitors with the H2 receptor antagonist, proton pump inhibitors are more efficacious compared to H2 receptor antagonist as far as the healing of duodenal ulcer or gastric ulcer is concerned. The other drug among the hyposecretory agents is the muscarinic antagonist. Now earlier we were using drugs such as atropine because atropine is a non-selective inhibitor of muscarinic receptor. It can block the muscarinic receptor non-selectively and it can reduce the acid production. But the chances of adverse effects was very high with atropine. So later on, the muscarinic M1 receptor antagonist was discovered, such as parengepine and telenjepine, and the idea was to reduce the meal-stimulated gastric acid secretion by reversible blocking of the muscarinic M1 receptors. But in these drugs also, such as with pyrangiapine or telangiapine, it has been observed that the anticholinergic side effects were there, such as dry mouth or blurred vision. So their uses is no longer preferred nowadays. Now let us move on to the other major class, that is antacids. Now antacids, you must have used personally, or you might have seen your friends or relatives using these over the counter drugs being used for treating acidity or acid peptic diseases, or for symptomatic relief of acid peptic diseases. So these antacids are weak bases and they neutralizes the gastric acid. So these weak bases, they react with gastric acid and they form water and salt, and they increases the gastric pH, and because gastric pH is increased, pepsinogen will not get converted into pepsin, so they will also decrease the pepsin activity, and it has been seen that they also increases the prostaglandin synthesis, though, so they can promote the mucosal defense. Now there are broadly two types of the antacid: systemic antacids and non-systemic antacids. Now what do I mean by systemic antacids and non-systemic antacids? Systemic antacids, they get absorbed systemically and they have got very potent acid neutralizing capacity, and they act instantly, they act very rapidly, and they have got a brief duration of action. So because they act very rapidly and they have got very potent acid neutralizing capacity, sometimes they are used for quick symptomatic relief of the acid peptic disease symptoms, such as heartburn. Other uses are to alkalize the urine or to treat the acidosis. But why the use of systemic antacids is not preferred? Because it can be absorbed systemically, and large dosage, if you use large dosage of systemic antacids, it can lead to systemic alkalosis. So that is one problem. It produces CO2 in the stomach, and this production of CO2 in the stomach can manifest as distension, discomfort, belching, and it can also lead to, sometimes it can lead to ulcer perforation, and sometimes it can lead to increased sodium load, which can be problematic in patients suffering from heart failure or patient suffering from edema, and sometimes acid rebound can happen. So because of those reasons, non-systemic antacids are sometimes preferred because they are poorly absorbed from the GI tract, and they raises the gastric pH only up to 3.5 to 4. They do not disturb the systemic acid-base balance. They do not elevate the urinary pH, and the rebound acidity is not a problem. So, but they have got a relatively slower onset of action. But though they have got a relatively slower onset of action, they have got prolonged duration of action. Usually, in the non-systemic antacids, we use a combination of the aluminum salt and magnesium salt, such as aluminum hydroxide plus magnesium trisilicate or aluminum hydroxide plus magnesium hydroxide. Now, what is the purpose of combining this aluminum hydroxide with magnesium hydroxide? Is it rational to combine aluminum hydroxide with magnesium hydroxide in antacid preparation? What is the reason for combining? The answer is they complement each other. If I say they complement each other, what does it mean? It means that magnesium hydroxide is rapidly acting, whereas aluminum hydroxide is slowly acting. Okay, so the combination provide a relatively fast onset of action and also sustained acid neutralizing ability or capacity. Then aluminum hydroxide causes constipation, whereas magnesium hydroxide leads to diarrhea. So if you combine both of them, ultimately what you will get, the bowel function will not get disturbed. You will get the normal bowel function. But the chances of side effects with non-systemic antacids will also be there, such as constipation because of the aluminum salt, because we have seen the aluminum relaxes the gastric smooth muscle and delays the gastric emptying time. Also, it can lead to hypophosphatemia and osteomalacia. Due to magnesium, the chances of diarrhea will be there, and in renal failure, aluminum toxicity can happen. So at most, you can use these non-systemic antacids for the symptomatic relief of the symptoms of the acid peptic disease. Now, one therapeutic question or one applied aspects that I will ask you. A patient comes to your clinic at midnight complaining of heartburn. You want to relieve his pain immediately. What drug you will choose? Yeah, you will choose antacids, because antacids neutralizes the already secreted acid in the stomach, and you will get instant relief. The patient will get instant relief. All the other drug act by stopping the acid secretion, and the effect will take some time to appear. But you have to be aware about the chances of drug interactions, because the antacids containing aluminum or magnesium or calcium, they might form inert complexes with the other drugs, and they can reduce the absorption of the other drugs such as tetracyclines or iron salts. So you can avoid these type of interaction by taking antacids either 2 hours before or 2 hours after ingestion of other drug, because it might form the insoluble complexes that are not absorbed, so it might hamper the absorption of other drugs. Now, next category of drug I will just quickly rush through is mucosal protective agents. Among mucosal protective agents, we have drugs such as sucralfate, misoprostol, which is basically a prostaglandin analog, and colloidal bismuth compounds. Now, this sucralfate is a salt of sucrose complex to sulfated aluminum hydroxide. And what this sucralfate does, in acidic environment, it polymerizes by cross-linking molecules to form sticky viscous gel, and this sticky viscous gel will adhere to the ulcer crater, and because it forms a sticky viscous gel that adheres to the ulcer crater, it acts as a physical barrier, or it acts as an acid resistant physical barrier. And over and above this particular acid resistant physical barrier, the deposition of dietary protein will happen, and this layer of dietary protein will form another coating. And this sucralfate may also stimulate prostaglandin synthesis, such as PGE2 synthesis. But the thing is, it should be taken on empty stomach 1 hour before meal, and you don't have to prescribe antacids or H2 antagonist along with sucralfate, because what we have seen, sucralfate need acidic environment for activation. Then prostaglandin analogs such as misoprostol. Yesterday we were discussing that prostaglandin inhibits the gastric acid secretion. It also enhances the mucus production and bicarbonate production, and it also enhances the mucosal blood flow. So overall it has got cytoprotective effect. So one stable analog of PGE1, which is known as misoprostol, is sometimes used for the prevention of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug induced mucosal injury. But the problem with the use of these prostaglandin analogs such as misoprostol is that you need to give it very frequently, like it needs dosing 4 times a day. You need to give it 4 times a day. The other thing is that it can lead to diarrhea, abdominal cramps, uterine bleeding. It can also lead to abortion, and it can accentuate inflammatory bowel disease. So it should not be used in inflammatory bowel disease and in pregnancy. Then colloidal bismuth substrate. This colloidal bismuth substrate and mucus forms the glycoprotein bicomplex which coats the ulcer crater. But the problem with the colloidal bismuth substrate is that it might cause blackening of stool and tongue. Because of that, it is not commonly used. In spite of its anti-H. pylori effect, it has got direct antimicrobial activity against H. pylori. So you might have seen, or we will discuss that in anti-H. pylori combination, one of the combination sometimes is colloidal bismuth substrate, because it has got direct anti-H. pylori effect. Now, one therapeutic question: a pregnant lady comes to you or comes to your clinic with peptic ulcer disease. She is a first trimester pregnancy case. Which drug you will prescribe? See, in this particular case, the best drug for the rapid symptomatic relief, or for that particular time, for the symptomatic relief, you should go for either antacids, or you can go for sucralfate, because H2 antagonist, it can cross the placental barrier and they can also get secreted in the breast milk. Safety of proton pump inhibitor has not been established in pregnancy. Prostaglandin analogs, we have just now seen that it can cause abortion. So at best you should go for either antacids or you can go for sucralfate. Just quickly, I will wrap up this class. Eradication of H. pylori. H. pylori has got a very important role in the causation of peptic ulcer. So we have a triple drug regimen or 4-drug combination that is available. In the triple drug, we have a combination of omeprazole or lansoprazole with clarithromycin with either amoxicillin or metronidazole, and this triple therapy should be given for 14 days and it should be followed by proton pump inhibitor for 4 to 6 weeks. There are other combination of triple therapy, or if triple therapy fails, you can go for either combination of omeprazole or lansoprazole with bismuth plus metronidazole and tetracycline. So with this we have discussed about the peptic ulcer drugs. So thank you.